"Father, I did something terrible." The words came out like a broken whisper but cut the silence of the church like a blade. There, kneeling before me in the confessional, was a young man who should not carry so much weight on his shoulders. Her hands trembled as she held a wrinkled roll, and that's when she knew that this wouldn't be a common confession. Let me go back a few hours ago. It was a Friday of October, when the shadows arrive early and the cold cuts the skin. The church of St. Michael was almost empty, illuminated only by the candles that fluttered on the altar, and the weak light leaked through the stained glass. The smell of melted wax and old wood hovered in the air, mixed with that heavy silence that only sacred places know. The stone columns rose like silent sentinels, and each echo of my steps echoed through the ship like a whispered prayer. There was something special that night, a density in the air that I only experienced a few times in my 40 years of priesthood. It was as if the church itself knew that something important was about to happen. I had been in the confessional 2 hours ago. Some faithful had passed with their routine guilt. Small lies, jealousy, hard words with the family. Mrs. Antonia confessed to having spoken her neighbor in the market. The young Carlos admitted to having glued to a college test. Human sins, understandable. Nothing that a sincere prayer and a purpose of change could not relieve. The confessional itself was a relic of ancient times, dark rosewood, delicate carvings that told biblical stories, and a golden grid that separated the confessor from the penitent. The red velvet cushion was spent through the knees of generations of the faithful. How many secrets have those walls have already kept? How many tears have been spilled into that small sacred space? It was then that I heard the steps, different steps, hesitant, as if each movement were an internal battle between advancing and running away. I stopped reading the breviary and paid attention. It was a sound that recognized, the sound of someone carrying a too heavy burden to their own shoulders. The steps stopped before the confessional, but for long minutes, nothing happened. Just the heavy breath of someone on the other side of the grid. He could feel the presence there, a nervous, almost desperate energy. It was as if I could hear the thoughts by debating. Should I come in? Should I speak? Should I keep this secret forever? I closed the breviary gently and waited. In decades of ministry, I learned that forcing confession is like trying to capture water with naked hands. Sometimes silence is the best prayer we can offer. He entered with insecure steps, almost unable to look into the eye. At first I thought it was a common youth guilt, but your words were like knives, which revealed that night still leaves me with an unanswered question. These words echoed in my mind when finally the door ranged and he entered. He was a boy of a maximum of 25 years. Dark hair misaligned as if he had passed his fingers for hundreds of times, back and reddish eyes as if he had not slept for weeks. He wore shabby jeans, a white TT shirt that had seen better days, and spending sneakers that told stories of many kilometers walked. But what caught my attention most was the way his hands didn't stop shaking. It was not cold. The church was warm by the candles lit. It was fear, pure fear, the kind that is born when one carries a secret that erodes the soul inside. He settled in the bench as if made of glass, careful, almost reverent. His eyes rapidly traveled the confessional, the wooden cross on the wall, the image of Christ merciful, the ancient notches. It was as if he were memorizing every detail, as if it were the last time he would be in a sacred place. "Good night, my son," he said with a soft voice I learned to use in 4 decades of priesthood. "God is here to hear you. There is no hurry, no judgment, just mercy." He knelt on the velvet pillow spent, but it took almost a minute to find the words. His hands closed and repeatedly opened, as if he tried to hold something that constantly escaped. The kneaded roll on his fingers made a dry noise with each nervous movement. When he spoke, his voice was just a thread. "Father, I don't know where to start." "Start by what weighs the most in your heart," I said. "God already knows all our secrets. Confession is to free us, not to hide them. Sometimes the simplest word is the first step to redemption." He took a deep breath 3 times as if she prepares to jump from a cliff. Each expiration brought a tremor, as if he were letting out pieces of himself in the air. I lied to my family about where I was last week. A lie. Expected I'll go like that. Young people often lie on girlfriends, drink, or some mischief that fear disappointing parents. It was family territory. I encouraged him to continue with a silent nod. He said he was traveling to work, but in fact, his voice completely failed. He swallowed dry as if the words were thorns. I was actually following someone. The word following fell like a stone in silence. It was not the term I expected. Following someone suggested something more deliberate, darker, more dangerous. "Following someone?" I asked, keeping the tone neutral but feeling a first cold climb through the spine. "Can you explain me better?" He nervously stirred the paper he held. It was an ordinary leaf, perhaps torn from a notebook, but it was so wrinkled that it seemed to have been opened and closed hundreds of times. The edges were spent, as if he carried her in her pocket weeks. It's a woman, older, married. He stopped, swallowed dry again. I fell in love with her, father, but she doesn't know I exist. Unpreamed passion, another common situation among young people, but the word following still echoed in my mind like a funeral bell. There was something there that didn't fit. Love, even the unrequited, does not usually leave people with that eye of terror in their eyes. How long have you been with accompany it? I chose the word carefully, waiting for him to correct for something less sinister. 6 months, responded quickly as if the words burned. I know where she works, where shopping, which street takes to return home. I know that on Tuesdays she goes to the beauty salon and that on Thursdays find a friend to have coffee at the bakery of the corner. A shiver went up my spine. That was not a passion. It was persecution. It was obsession. It was something that should not exist among the sacred walls of that church. I know she likes to read on the square of the square during lunch, continued, her eyes now fixed on the floor. Always romance books. I know you have allergies to cats because it sneezes whenever it goes close to the pet shop. I know it argues with their mother on the phone every Wednesday at 7 at night. Every detail that came out of his mouth was like a needle. It was too intimate information, too accurate, collected in a disturbing way. My son, I started carefully, feeling that I was stepping on dangerous ground. Have you tried to approach her in a way normal? Did you talk to her? He laughed, a bitter humor sound, which echoed for the confessional as the creak of a rusty door. Talking? Father, I never said a word to her. I don't even know your real name. Like this? The question came out more rough than I intended. I call her Helena, but it's just because she looks like a Helena I met at school. His words came out faster now, as if a dam had broken. She doesn't know I exist, but I know every detail of her life. I know she's afraid of dogs because she crosses the street whenever she sees one. I know she likes yellow flowers because forever she sees sunflowers in the flower of Augusta Street. I know the wedding is not going well because it always leaves home with a red face on Mondays after the husband goes to work. My mouth was dry. In 4 decades listening to confessions, I thought I had heard everything. Adulteries, thefts, lies, even some smaller crimes. But there was something in the way he talked about this woman, as if she were a book character he had created, studied, possessed only with the look. And last week, continued, and her voice lowered until she became almost inaudible, I found out where she lives. The candles seemed to foolish more intensely, or maybe it was my eyes reacting to what I was hearing. The confessional, who had always been my refuge, my place of peace, suddenly looked too small, suffocating. Did you find out how? I followed her after work. She left the commercial building at 5:43 as always. He took the bus from line 23, then moved to 47, and then walked for 15 minutes until he arrived in a blue building on Rua das Palmeiras. He paused, and the silence was filled only by the distant sound of the wind beating the stained glass. Father, I stayed across the street to darken. I saw when she lit the lights in the 3rd floor. I saw when she had dinner alone in the kitchen because her husband only arrived at 10 at night. I saw when she stayed on the porch watering the plants. His voice was getting lower, more intimate, as if he was telling a dream. I saw when he stopped abruptly, as if he had realized he was going too far, or as if it had reached the part that really needed to confess. I saw when what? I asked, although I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. His hands tightened the kneaded roll so hard that I heard the dry noise of the paper doing completely. Small pieces fell to the confessional floor like dirty snow. I saw when she stayed at the window looking at the street. For a moment, priest, for a moment I had the feeling she was looking straight at me. The silence that followed was dense as a melted lead. I could hear my own heart beating the ribs, and a question began to form in my mind like a black cloud. If he had never spoken to her, if he didn't even know his real name, how had he been able to find out where she worked? My son, said slowly, every heavy word like a prayer. How did you follow this woman? He hesitated. For long seconds, only the sound of our irregular breathing filled the confessional. When he finally spoke, there was something different in his voice. Something colder, further, as if a mask had fallen. This is part of what I need to confess, Father, because the first time I saw it, he unfolded the remains of the kneaded paper in his hands, revealing something written with nervous lyrics. The first time I saw her, she was crying. These words were suspended in the air as a smoke of incense that refuses to dissipate. There was something in the way he said crying that didn't fit the rest of the story. It was not the casual mention of someone who saw a strange sad on the street. It was too intimate, too specific. It was as if he were describing a scene he had observed in slow motion, memorizing every tear, every tremor of his lips. Where was this, my son? I asked, watching how his hands continued to destroy the remains of the paper with almost surgical accuracy. He took a long time to answer. Her eyes traveled the confessional again, holding out on the small wooden cross above my head, then in the padded seat where she was kneeling. as if she sought an existing exit. Silence extended for so long that I even wondered if he had changed his mind about continuing confession. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. It was lower, more careful, every word measured as if it were a drop of poison that he was managing accurately. At the São Vicente Hospital. Hospital. The word fell like a lead weight on my chest. Hospitals are not places where one sees someone casually, where sudden passions are developed by strange. These are places where it goes for specific reasons, urgent, often desperate. These are places where life and death dance an intimate waltz, where emotions get crude, more exposed. Do you work there? No. He shook his head quickly, as if the idea was absurd. I was visiting my grandmother. She was hospitalized in the 4th floor, geriatric wing, liver cancer, terminal phase. He paused long, and for the first time since he entered, his eyes found mine through the golden grid. There was something there that made me deeply restless, an intensity that didn't match someone talking about a routine hospital visit. It was the look of those who keep secrets, who saw things they should not have seen. Grandma Sophia has always been special to me, Father. She created me when my mother died. She was a strong woman, you know. Never complained about anything, nor the pain I knew she felt. His eyes moistened slightly. But seeing her willing in that bed, that's when I realized how slow death can be slow, cruel. There was something disturbing in the way he connected his grandmother's suffering with what he was about to tell, as if one thing justified the other. It was my 3rd day visiting Grandma. I was always going through the same corridor to reach her room, those long, sterile corridors who smelled the disinfectant and despair. And it was on the 2nd day I saw her. The woman? Helena. The name came out like a whispered prayer, loaded with a reverence that caused me goosebumps. She was sitting on the 3rd floor corridor near the ICU, blue plastic bank, those who are uncomfortable on purpose, as if the hospital wanted people to not stay long. Or the description was too cinematic, too detailed to someone who just passed through the corridor. It was as if he had studied the scene, recorded every detail in memory. I was wearing a light blue dress, half faded, as if it were an outfit that was wearing only in emergencies, holding a black leather bag on your lap, those that cost little but try to look like expensive, and the tears. He stopped, as if he needed to taste the memory. Father. Tears fell silent through her face, but she didn't even try to wipe them down. It was as if she had given up fighting the pain, as if the tears were part of her now. The way he described the suffering of others had something wicked. It was not compassion, it was fascination. It was like describing a work of art that moved it, not the real suffering of a real person. Did you stop to help? I asked, although I knew the answer. No, responded quickly, without hesitation. I stood there at the end of the hallway close to the coffee machine that never worked well, just watching. Again that word that carried too much weight, which suggested something beyond normal curiosity. How long? He hesitated for the first time. His hand stopped moving the paper for a moment as if the question had caught him in the act. I saw a blush up your neck. About 15 minutes, maybe 20. It may have been more. 20 minutes or more watching a strange cry in a hospital. This was not compassion or casual curiosity. This was emotional voyeurism, feeding on the pain of others as a parasite. And then she got up, lifted herself slowly, as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, and entered the ICU. I followed the hallway, pretending to go to the coffee shop, and managed to see through the glass door. She was next to a bed where there was an older man, with devices connected throughout her body, tubes, wires, monitors that flashed numbers that I didn't understand. The details were still very specific. He not only saw, he investigated, followed, collected information like a private detective. The man was unconscious, breathing with the help of a device. He looked smaller in bed, as if the disease had sucked part of him. And she approached the bed and held his hand. There was something in the way described the scene that bothered me. It was too intimate for someone who was just passing through the corridor. I thought it was her father, he continued. Or maybe the father-in-law, someone in the nearby family. The way she held his hand, how she whispered words I couldn't hear. It seemed genuine love, you know. He stopped abruptly, as if he realized he was revealing more than he intended. But then what? Then I discovered who the man was in bed, and I found out that not everything was what it seemed. Silence. A heavy silence that seemed to suck the air from the confessional. I could feel that we were approaching something crucial, something he was struggling not to tell, but at the same time he desperately needed to share with someone. How did you find out? He completely unfolded the remains of the paper. Now I could see that there was much more written there than I imagined. Numbers, words in a girl, and nervous addresses, schedules. It looked like an investigation record, or perhaps the obsessive notes of someone who had lost the line between interest and persecution. I asked a nurse. Asked? The word came out more rough than it intended. He said he was a family friend and wanted to know about the patient's condition. His words came out faster now, as water escaping from a cracked dam. The nurse, a kind lady named Conceição, told me the name. Roberto Mendes da Silva, 58, a merchant, hospitalized for a week with myocardial infarction, reserved prognosis. He knew the full name, age, profession, and diagnosis of man. This was no longer a casual observation. It was a deliberate and systematic investigation. And did you find out he was her husband? The words came out like a punch in the stomach. Suddenly the whole story has taken a different, more sinister form. He had not seen a random woman crying for a sick relative. He had seen a desperate wife next to her dying husband, and instead of offering help or pushing respectfully, he had investigated, collected data, transformed her suffering into an object of study. "My son," he said carefully, feeling that he was stepping on increasingly dangerous ground. "Did you keep visiting your grandmother?" "Yes, every day for a full week." "And she, Helena, did you keep showing up?" A strange smile crossed his face. It was not a smile of joy, nor of sweet nostalgia. It was something more disturbing, as if remembering a secret pleasure, a satisfaction that should not exist. "Every day, father. Every santo day. Like a watch. She always arrived at 2 in the afternoon. I timed after the second day, and stayed until the 5 in point. Always with the same blue dress, always with the same black bag, and always crying the same way. Silent, controlled, as if talking to God and asking for strength. The way he talked about her suffering ritual was almost reverent, as if it were beautiful he was contemplating, a daily performance he had the privilege of watching. I started adjusting my grandmother's business schedules to coincide with hers, he continued, without me asking. I told Grandma I had work commitments, but actually passed the 3rd floor before climbing the bedroom. I always found an excuse to be around. For what? To see her, to be close to her, to study that perfect sadness. Perfect sadness. The expression made me nauseated. He was romanticizing a woman's suffering into mourning, turning her pain into personal entertainment. "And is that how you discovered other details about it?" "Yes, gradually, as if you were setting up a puzzle." His eyes shone with something that made me feel cold. "I found that she worked in a municipal school because she always carried a folder with tests to correct. Mathematics for the exercises I could see when she opened the folder. Did you watch what she read?" "Sure, it was fascinating. She corrected the proofs during the long waits but always stopped in the middle when some usual monitor emitted a different sound. It was as if each beep could be the last one." He was describing a complete invasion of privacy, as if it were an academic research. "I found that I lived far away because I always got breathless, as if I had run from the bus stop not to be late. I found out that it was economical because it always brought a snack from home instead of buying at the coffee shop. And I found—" He stopped again, looking at the paper in his hands as if he continued secrets that he even fully understood. "Did you find out what?" "I found out she was afraid." "Fear of what?" "Fear that he would die. But also," he hesitated as if he was about to cross a line that should not be crossed. "Also fear that he wouldn't die." There was something in the way I said that left me with a cold in my stomach. It was not the compassionate observation of someone who understood the complexity of mourning. It was something more calculating, as if he had decoded something sinister in her gestures. "On the 4th day," he continued, "I saw her talking to her doctor in the hall. Dr. Henrique Santos, cardiologist. I read in the badge when he passed me. I couldn't hear everything, but I positioned myself close enough to get some words. Prognosis, family, prepare for the worst, question of days." He had been deliberately struggling to hear a private medical conversation. This was no longer observation, it was deliberate invasion, emotional espionage. "And on the 5th day, father," his voice lowered until he became almost inaudible. "On the 5th day something happened that changed everything." I felt my heart accelerate. There was something in the way he said, "changed everything," that sounded like the prelude of a real confession, the moment where history would no longer be over observation and become about action. "What happened?" He looked straight at me, and for the first time I saw something different in his eyes. It was no longer the nervous shyness of the beginning. It was something colder, more determined, more dangerous. "She forgot the bag." "Like this?" "When she left the ICU that day, she forgot the black bag in the hallway. She had just talked to Dr. Santos about the necessary preparations. I heard this part clearly. She was so shaken after the conversation that she simply stood up as an automaton and left, leaving her bag behind, leaning against the wall where she used to sit. My mouth was dry. I could feel where the story was going, and I liked nothing absolutely the way. "And you?" "I took the bag." The words were suspended in the air as an accusation. Picking up a strange bag was not an act of kindness or casual encounter. It was misappropriation. It was violation. It was the first step to something much darker. To return to her? He laughed again, that bitter and humor sound that was beginning to disturb me deeply, like the nail ranger on a slate. Yes, Father, that's what I said to myself. I was going to return the next day. It was just a good Samaritan wanting to help a woman in suffering. It was my opportunity to finally talk to her, to introduce me as a kind and helpful someone. But that's not what happened. No, he unfolded another piece of paper, revealing what seemed to be a detailed list. Addresses, phone numbers, names. That's not what happened. The confessional suddenly looked smaller, stuffy. I could feel the weight of sin that was about to be revealed, and for the first time in decades of ministry, I wondered if I really wanted to hear what was coming. What did you do with the bag? I opened it. Simple as that. 3 words that carried the weight of a complete violation. Not only did he take the bag, he violated it, invaded the most intimate privacy of that woman in mourning, turned her vulnerability into opportunity. And what did you find? His eyes shone with something that made me feel physical nausea. I found her whole life, priest. Documents, ID card. Helena Cristina Mendes de Silva, 42, municipal teacher. Full address, Rua das Palmeiras, 847, 32 apartment, residential and mobile phone. Keys from the apartment and car. Credit cards. He took a dramatic break, savoring every word. And I found something else. Something she didn't want anyone to see. What? He showed me the wrinkled roll. Now it could clearly see that it was a hand-written photocopy. Numbers, addresses, and in the end, a female and nervous note. If something happens to me, look for Maria Santos. Sister, knows everything. Tells in Banco do Brasil, branch 2847. My blood froze. That was not just any annotation. It was the type of note that someone writes when he fears for his life, when there are secrets that can be dangerous, when I suspect it may not return home. My son said with a trembling voice, "Did you return the bag?" The smile that crossed his face at that moment was the most disturbing thing I've seen in 40 years of priesthood. It was a smile of triumph, of discovery, of someone who had found a treasure that should not exist. Father, when I read that ticket, when I saw the bank account numbers, when I found a second ID card hidden in the lining of the bag, a fake identity with the name Cristina Santos, I knew that Helena was not just a woman suffering from her husband's illness. What was it? He leaned forward, bringing his face closer to the grid, and whispered as if revealing the biggest secret in the world. It was a woman who was praying for him to die, and who had a lot more reasons for this prayer than I never imagined. His words echoed by the confessional, as an echo of a blasphemy. I could feel my dry throat, as if the air had been sucked from the small sacred space. In 4 decades listening to confessions, I learned to recognize when someone was about to confess something that would forever change the way I would see the world. My son said carefully, "Did you say there were reasons?" "What reasons?" He doubled and unfolded the remains of the paper nervously. Her fingers trembled so much that small pieces continued to fall to the confessional floor like dirty snow. "Father, do you believe there are people who are born to suffer? People who attract pain like a magnet?" The question caught me off guard. It was not what he expected after the revelation about Helena was praying for her husband's death. "Why do you ask that?" "Because when I opened that bag, when I read those papers, I began to understand that Helena was not an ordinary victim. She was..." He paused, looking for the right words. "She was someone who had learned to survive in hell. Survive in hell." The expression left me with a cold in my pimple. Continue. "Besides the fake identity and the ticket about if something happens to me, I found other things in my bag. Things that made no sense to an ordinary teacher." He unfolded another piece of paper, showing what seemed to be a list written with a small letter. "I found medical recipes in the name of Cristina Santos, the false identity, antidepressants, soothing, anxiety medicines, but also..." His voice has lowered. "Also contraceptive pills prescribed for someone who, according to the ID card, had been married for 15 years but never had children. Contraceptives for a married woman for 15 years. This suggested secrets within marriage, decisions that the husband possibly did not know. And I found photographs." "What kind of photographs?" "Old photos, priest. Younger but injured. One had a poorly disguised purple eye with makeup. Another showed an arm in the arm that was clearly not an accident. Domestic violence." Suddenly the pieces began to fit sinisterly. Helena was not just suffering from her husband's illness. She was living a much longer and more complex nightmare. "Did you return the bag after seeing this?" He laughed bitterly. "Father, after seeing those photos, after understanding what kind of man was Roberto da Silva, I knew I couldn't just return the bag. I had to do something. Do something." The words carried a weight that scared me. "What did you do?" "First, I copied everything. Each document, every photo, each number. Then I put the bag back in the same place as the corridor the next day before it arrived." He had planned everything meticulously. This was no longer impulsivity, it was premeditation. Did she find the bag? Yes. I saw when he arrived on that 6th day. He ran to where he had left, took the bag, and quickly checked the content. From her relief on her face, I realized that she didn't notice that anyone had moved. And then something happened that changed everything, Father. Something that made me understand that I was not just an observer in that story. I felt my heart accelerate. There was something in the way he said, "changed everything, Ava," as the prelude of a confession that I was not prepared to listen. What happened? Roberto da Silva woke up. Silence. A dense silence that seemed to suck the whole air of the confessional. Did he get out of coma? For a few hours. Doctors called temporary wake-up. Sometimes it happens before the end. His words came out slower now, as if each one gave. I was visiting my grandmother when I heard the agitation on the 3rd floor. I went down to see what was going on. And did he see Helena? I saw, but I also saw Roberto. And Father, he leaned forward, bringing his face closer to the grid. I saw who that man really was. There was genuine terror in his eyes now. Terror and something more. A cold determination that made me deeply restless. When Helena entered the room, thinking that she could finally say goodbye in peace, he grabbed her by the wrist. Even weak, even linked to the devices, he grabbed her hard enough to leave marks. I could imagine the scene, a woman waiting for a quiet goodbye, being surprised by the last demonstration of violence from her agonizing husband. And I heard what he said to her. What did you say? He said he knew. He knew about the secret bank account, about the documents she was hiding, about her plans after he died. The mystery was unraveling in a disturbing way. Roberto was not just a violent husband, he was someone who controlled Helena, even on the brink of death. But the worst, Father, that's what he said later. What? He said that if she thought she was going to get rid of him easily, she was wrong. That even dead, she would find a way to destroy her life, threats beyond the grave. It was the kind of psychological cruelty that marks a person forever. He said he had left instructions with someone who knew all her secrets and who was going to take care that she was never free. Instructions? As a time bomb, Father. Roberto had guaranteed that even after being dead, Helena would remain her prisoner. The story was taking proportions that went far beyond ordinary domestic violence. It was a control system that transcended death. And Helena? How did you react? She begged, literally knelt beside the bed and begged him to have mercy. He said he would do anything, that he would give all the money he had saved, that he would give up on any plan to restart life. The image of Helena kneeling, begging mercy on a dying man who had terrified her for years was devastating. But he just laughed, a weak laugh but full of malice, and said one last thing before fainting again. What did you say? Said the name of the person who had the instructions. And Father, he paused, as if the next words were too physical to leave. It was someone Helena knew very well. I could feel we were coming to the core of something terrible. Who was it? Her brother, Carlos Santos. The name fell like a bomb. It was not a stranger, a lawyer, or a business partner. It was a family. It was someone Helena should be able to trust. Do you know this Carlos? Not personally, but after I heard the name, I researched him. Of course he researched. His obsession had no limits. What did you find out? Carlos Santos is a retired police delegate. He lives 3 blocks from Helena's house, and according to the records I was able to access, he hesitated. According to the records, he and Roberto were very close, much closer than it would be normal among sisters-in-law. The control network was turning more complex and sinister than I imagined. Helena, did you know about this proximity? From the desperation on her face when Roberto said the name, I would say she not only knew, she feared. Carlos was not just the depositary of Roberto's secrets. He was a co-conspiring. And after this conversation, Roberto passed out again and died 3 hours later. But before he died, he paused, and I saw his hands shake violently. Before I died, something happened that made me make a decision. I felt a shiver up the spine. There was something in the way he said decision that sounded like a line being crossed, a point of no return. What decision? I decided that Helena couldn't face that alone. He entered with insecure steps, almost unable to look into the eye. At first I thought it was a common youth guilt, but your words were like knives, which revealed that night still leaves me with an unanswered question. The words of the mini-historia echoed in my mind as a omen. I was beginning to understand that this confession went far beyond voyeurism or obsession. It was about someone who had decided to actively insert himself into a story of pain and revenge. How did you decide help, Helena? Father, have you ever seen someone who was drowning? The way the eyes demonstrate or pure as if they could see death approaching? Yes, this was how Helena looked at the emptiness in those final moments of Roberto, as if she knew that his death would not be release but the beginning of an even worse torment. And you felt you needed to intervene. I felt that God had put me there for a reason, Father. that all that remark, all that proximity to her suffering, was part of a larger plan. He was justifying his obsession as a divine mission. It was the kind of rationalization that made me deeply worried. "What did you do?" He looked at me straight into the eyes, and for the first time I saw something beyond nervousness or guilt. Determination. A cold determination that made me wonder if I really wanted to hear the answer. "I went after Carlos Santos." The words were suspended in the air as a death sentence. He had left the role of observer and became an active participating, had transformed his obsession into action. For what? To find out exactly what kind of instructions Roberto had left, and to decide if Carlos Santos deserved to continue breathing. His words echoed in the confessional as a death sentence. I felt my throat close, as if the air had become too thick to breathe. In 40 years of priesthood, I learned to recognize the exact moment when a confession crosses the line between sin and crime, and at that moment, I knew I was facing something I might not have to hear. "My son," he said in a shaky voice, "what did you do?" He took a deep breath 3 times as if he needed to prepare to jump from a cliff. His hands continued to destroy the remains of the paper, but now the movements were more controlled, almost ritualized. "Father, do you believe that some people are born to be instruments of justice? May God sometimes choose the most unlikely to correct what is wrong in the world?" The question made me restless. It was the kind of rationalization that precedes terrible confessions when someone tries to turn a crime into a divine mission. "Continue your story," I answered, avoiding validating your line of reasoning. 2 days after Roberto's funeral, a small funeral, only Helena, some neighbors, and of course Carlos Santos, I went to his house. Silence. A heavy silence that seemed to carry the weight of an irreversible decision. "How did you find the house?" "Rua das Acacias, 127, Casa Amarela with green gate. I discovered the address through Roberto's obituary, where Carlos was listed as dear brother, in-law, and close friend. The accuracy of the details was disturbing. He had not gone impulsively, had planned, researched, prepared. What time did it go there?" 10 at night, late enough to make sure the neighbors were sleeping, but soon enough to find him awake. My blood froze. He had chosen the time strategically. This was no visit. It was much more sinister. "And what happened when you got there?" His eyes settled on any point behind me, as if reliving the scene in slow motion. I touched the bell. Carlos opened the door wearing only a tank top and shorts. He was a big man, priest, tall, wide shoulders, huge hands, the kind of person who intimidates only by presence. He was describing Carlos as if he were an opponent who had studied before facing. But when he saw me at the door, an ordinary, thin, seemingly harmless young man, he lowered his guard. "What did you say to him?" "He said he was a friend of Helena, and that she was worried about some things Roberto had mentioned before she died. He said she wanted to help resolve any misunderstanding." Lies elaborated. He had created a convincing story to get access to the house. Carlos believed. Initially, yes. He invited me to enter, offered coffee. The house smelled of cigarette and old beer. It was messy, with scattered newspapers and empty bottles on the table. The description was too visual, too detailed, as if he had memorized every aspect of the environment. We sat in the room. There were pictures of Carlos and Roberto together, fishing, playing cards, drinking. Many more photos than would be normal among sisters. And then, so I said Helena was worried about documents Roberto would have left him. Documents that could cause problems for her. He had gone straight to the point, bluntly, without subtlety. How did Carlos react? First, he tried to pretend he didn't know what I was talking about. He said that Roberto had not made anything important to him, just a few personal effects. But you didn't believe it. I knew he was lying, Father. The way he avoided my gaze, how nervously stirred the beer glass. They were obvious signs. Signs he had learned to read during his obsessive observations of Helena, so I pressed a little more. He said Helena had told me about certain instructions that Roberto would have left. And then his countenance changed completely. I felt a shiver up the spine. There was something in the way he described the change in Carlos's behavior that suggested real danger. "Did you change how?" His eyes narrowed. The body was tense. Suddenly it was no longer the helpful brother-in-law offering coffee. He was the former delegate used to intimidating people. What did he say? He asked who I was, really. He said Helena had never mentioned any friend young man. He said that if I was there asking questions, it was because she had told me where he shouldn't. The situation had climbed quickly. Carlos had realized that something was not right. "And you?" I told the truth. "What's true?" "That I had seen Helena in the hospital. Who knew about the violence she suffered? Who knew the secrets that Roberto kept about her?" It was a dangerous admission to make a potentially corrupt former police officer. How did Carlos react to this? He laughed, a cold humor laugh. He said I had no idea what I was getting into me, and said something else. He said Helena was a manipulative liar who had been able to fool a lot of people over the years, that the marks I thought were of violence were in fact the result of her own instability. Carlos was rewriting the narrative, turning Helena from victim into a villain. Did you believe? Not for a second, Father, but I let him keep talking. And what else did he say? He said Roberto had discovered that Helena was planning to kill him. The words fell like a bomb in the confessional. Helena was not just suffering domestic violence, she was planning a murder. Kill you how? Poison. Small doses of a compound that would immerse the symptoms of heart problems. Roberto had discovered the plan and saved evidence. Jars, false medical recipes, Helena notes on dosages. The story was taking proportions that I didn't imagine. It was not just a case of domestic violence but attempted mutual murder. And these evidence were with Carlos? Yes, he showed them to me. Did you show? It took me to a closet in the living room and took a box of shoes. Inside there were 3 small glass vials, counterfeit medical recipes, and a notebook with Helena's lyrics. Physical evidence. Carlos was not just inventing stories, he had concrete evidence. What was written in the notebook? Dosages calculated by body weight, expected symptoms, administration schedule, and in the end, he paused, as if the next words were particularly difficult to say. In the end, a scheduled date, definitive liberation, October 15th, the day Roberto had the heart attack at the hospital. Helena was poisoning her husband? According to Carlos, yes, but Roberto discovered and pretended to be dying naturally to catch her in the act. And the plan worked? To some extent. Roberto got the evidence he needed to destroy Helena after his death, but the body could not stand the representation. The infarction that should be pretended became real. The irony was disturbing. Roberto really died as he tried to fake his own death to incriminate his wife. And Carlos? Carlos inherited the responsibility to deliver the evidence to the police. Roberto had left specific instructions: wait a week after the funeral and after denouncing Helena for attempted murder. Why wait a week? To give her time to relax, to think she was free. Roberto wanted her to feel the taste of freedom before losing her forever. Cruelty beyond the grave. Even dead, Roberto was still torturing Helena. And you? What did you do with this information? He looked at me straight in the eye, and for the first time I saw something that made me tremble. It was no longer nervous or guilt. It was cold, a calculating coldness that should not exist in someone so young. I told Carlos that I understood the situation. I thought it was fair Helena to pay for what she had done. But that's not what you really thought. No, because while Carlos was talking, I noticed something he didn't expect me to note. What? In the photos of Roberto and Carlos together, in several of them Roberto had marks, small cuts, bruises, scratches, always disguised as fishing accidents or stumbling blocks. He had observed details that escaped Carlos himself. Carlos was also violent. Carlos was not just an accomplice of Roberto's violence against Helena, Father. He was an active participant. The abuse network was even broader than I imagined. How did you find out this? Because as he showed the evidence against Helena, I saw other things in the house. Polaroid photos hidden among newspapers. Helena photos in situations compromising. I felt nausea go up Pesci throat. What kind of photos? Photos that proved that Roberto and Carlos were not just sisters who drank together. They were partners in something much more sinister. My God. And that's when I saw these photos that I made a decision, Father. I felt my heart accelerate. There was something in the way he said decision that sounded like a sentence being performed. What decision? I decided that Carlos Santos was not going to live to deliver those false evidence to the police. He entered with insecure steps, almost unable to look into the eye. At first I thought it was a common youth guilt, but your words were like knives, which revealed that night still leaves me with an unanswered question. The words of the mini-historia echoed in my mind as a omen that finally materialized. I was listening to the confession of someone who had crossed a line that could not be disrupted. What did you do with Carlos? He took a deep breath, as if preparing to confess the unforgivable. Father, have you heard of poetic justice? My son, Carlos kept poison at home. The same poison that Roberto used to incriminate Helena. He was in the kitchen in a bottle without label, hidden behind the sugar. My mouth was completely dry. And I put 3 drops in his beer. The words came out like a whisper, but cut the confessional's silence as a blade. 3 enough drops to simulate a heart attack in a man the size of him. Murder. I was listening to the confession of a premeditated murder. Carlos died? Carlos died an hour after I left his house. The neighbors found the body the next morning. The autopsy declared death by fulminating heart attack. And the evidence against Helena? I burned everything before I left. The bottles, the recipes, the notebook, the photos. Everything became ashes in the fireplace of Carlos's own house. He had destroyed the evidence and eliminated the only person who could incriminate Helena. Helena got free. Helena was free. But Father, he paused. and for the first time since he started confessing, I saw tears in his eyes. She never knew it was saved. Like this? She never knew that there were evidence against her. I never knew that Carlos was planning to deliver her to the police. And I never knew someone saved her. The silent sacrifice. He had killed to protect a woman who didn't even know she needed to be protected. And you never told her? How could you? Hello, Helena. I'm the guy who followed you for months, stole your bag, invaded your privacy, and killed your brother-in-law to save you from a murder accusation. The irony was devastating. He had become so obsessive to protect her that it made any real relationship impossible with her impossible. Where is Helena now? It moved 3 weeks after Roberto's funeral. He sold the house, took the money from the secret account and disappeared. I never saw it again. And you? And I was here, Father, carrying the weight of what I did. I know I saved an innocent life, but also knowing that I took a guilty life. He had become both the savior and the condemned in his own history. That's why I came to confess? I came to confess because he hesitated, as if there was still something he didn't have the courage to say. Because Carlos Santos was not the only person who died because of my obsession with Helena. His words echoed by the confessional as the bending of funeral bells. I felt my soul retire, as if I tried to hide from a heavy truth to be carried. In 40 years listening to confessions, I learned that there is a limit to what the human heart can endure, and at that moment I knew I was about to exceed this limit. How many people died? I asked, although I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. He looked at his own hands as if they were strange, as if they belonged to someone else. The remains of the crumpled paper were scattered on the confessional floor like withered petals of a poisoned flower. 3, whispered. 3 people besides Carlos. 3 lives, 3 destroyed families. 3 funerals that happened because a young man decided that he could be a judge, jury, and executor on behalf of a woman who didn't even know he existed. Tell me about them, he said, though each word came out like a prayer, asking strength to endure what was to come. He took a deep breath 3 times as if he had to gather the courage to open the last drawers of his soul. The first was Maria Santos. The name hit me like a punch. Maria Santos, the person mentioned in Helena's ticket, the one who knew everything. Helena's sister? Yes. 2 weeks after Helena disappeared, Maria started asking questions. He appeared in the neighborhood where Helena lived, talked with neighbors, visited the school where she worked. There was something in the way he described Maria's actions that sounded like a threat being catalogued. Maria was looking for Helena. Maria was investigating. She knew about the secret bank account, about the fake documents, about the whole system Helena had created to escape Roberto. And that bothered you? It bothered me because Maria wasn't looking for Helena to help. I was looking to judge. Judgment. The word carried a weight that made me understand where the story was going. How did you find out this? I followed her. As he had followed Helena, I started to follow Maria. I wanted to understand what she really wanted. The obsession had transferred. Helena had disappeared, but he needed someone to watch, someone to protect, or eliminate. And what did you find out? I found that Mary blamed Helena for Roberto's death. He believed that her sister had poisoned her husband and fled with the money. She was right. It was partially right, Father. Helena was really poisoning Roberto, but Maria didn't know about the years of violence, about Carlos, about the whole network of abuse Helena was trying to escape. He continued to justify his actions as protection to Helena, even after he lost her from sight. And then, Maria went to police. He filed a complaint against Helena for murder and suspicious disappearance. He said he had evidence. What evidence? Letters. Helena had written to Mary over the years. Letters where she mentioned dreams of freedom and plans for the future. Mary interpreted these letters as confessions from a murder plan, circumstantial evidence that could destroy Helena, even after her escape. Did the police take the complaint seriously? It took. They started an investigation, and if this investigation went on, Helena would be found and arrested. Exactly, and I couldn't allow it. The coldness he said could not allow made me tremble. There was no emotion, just logical determination. What did you do with Maria? The same thing I did with Carlos. Poison. 3 drops in the cafe she had every afternoons on the bank of the central square. Another premeditated homicide. Another cardiac accident that was actually silent execution. Maria died? Maria died. And with her the only person was actively looking for Helena. And the letters? The evidence? I stole from her house before the police did the official search. I burned everything just as I had done with Carlos's documents. He was systematically erasing any trail he could take to Helena. It was an obsession that had become a crusade of cleaning. And the second person, his eyes fixed on the small wooden cross above my head, as if confessing directly to Christ, Delegate Ferreira, the police officer responsible for investigating Maria's complaint. Now he was killing agents of the law. The climbing had become terrifying. Why? Because even after Mary's death he continued to investigate. He said that cases of disappearance do not automatically close just because the complainant dies. A dedicated policeman doing his work, and that had become a death sentence. How did you kill a delegate? Ferreira had diabetes. I discovered this by watching him for a week. He took insulin regularly, always at the same times. The meticulosity was scary. He had studied the victim's medical habits to plan the murder, and replaces insulin with a concentrated dose of potassium, instant cardiac arrest during what seemed to be a routine medicine application. Medical knowledge applied to kill. It was a complete perversion of the science of healing. No one suspected. Diabetics die from complications all the time, especially stressed diabetics who work with difficult cases. And the research on Helena? He died with Ferreira. His replacement had other priorities, more recent cases. Helena's disappearance was filed as an inconclusive investigation. Once again, he had saved Helena, eliminating any threat to her freedom. And the third person? Here he hesitated. For the first time since he began to confess homicides, I saw genuine emotion in his eyes. No regret, but something like sadness. The third person was someone I didn't want to kill. Who was it? My grandmother, Sophia. The world stopped. He had killed his own grandmother, the woman who had created him after her mother's death. Why? The question came out like a horrified whisper. Because she was starting to suspect. Suspect what? That I was different. That something had changed in me after visits to the hospital. She knew me too well, Father. Better than anyone in the world. Love becoming a fatal vulnerability. What did she find out? He found copies of Helena's documents hidden in my room. The papers I had photocopied before returning the bag. Physical evidence that they burned Helena, and, by extension, to the whole chain of death. And she confronted you? The last night I spent with her. Asked why I had documents from a stranger, why I knew so much details about the life of a woman I said I never saw. What did you answer? I tried to lie. I said I had found the rolls on the street, which was just curiosity. But he paused, and for the first time I saw real tears in his eyes. She said she was going to tell the police. She couldn't protect a grandson who was getting involved with dangerous things. Hard love. The grandmother was trying to save him from himself. And you? I increased the morphine dose she received for cancer pain, just enough to seem like a natural progression of the disease. He had transformed palliative care into murder method. He had killed the only person who loved him unconditionally. Did she suffer? No. It was like falling asleep, pacific, as she deserved. Even in the murder, he tried to find mercy, and you got free. I was. Free to live with the weight of what I had done, free to carry 4 deaths in consciousness, 4 lived lives to protect a woman who had disappeared without ever knowing that she had been saved. The confessional suddenly looked less than a tomb. The air was thick, loaded with the weight of confessions that should never have been made. I looked at that young man, no longer a young man, but something that had become something else, and wondered if there is forgiveness for some acts. He entered with insecure steps, almost unable to look into the eye. At first I thought it was a common youth guilt, but your words were like knives, which revealed that night still leaves me with an unanswered question. The words of the mini-history echoed in my mind as a prophecy fulfilled. He had entered as a young man carrying guilt. He left as a confessed 4 homicides that would never be investigated. My son, said finally, do you understand what you did? I understand that I saved an innocent woman of a life of torment, and I understand that I condemned myself to a life of silence. And regret? Repentance? He thought for a long moment. I feel regret for my grandmother, only for her. The other 3, it was necessary. Necessary. He still believed he had done the right thing. Do you plan to continue? Continue what, priest? Killing to protect Helena. Helena has disappeared. It's free. My mission is over. Mission. He had transformed unhealthy obsession into divine purpose. What if she is found? He looked at me straight in the eyes, and what I saw there made me tremble. It was the coldness of someone who had crossed so many lines that there were no more moral borders. If someone threatens Helena again, priest, I'll do whatever it takes. He got up slowly, straightened the shabby jeans jacket, and looked at me one last time. Can I receive acquittal? The question hit me as a lightning. How to acquit someone who did not feel genuine regret? How to give forgiveness to those who plan to continue killing if necessary? Acquittal requires true repentance and purpose of change, I answered, so I don't think I can be acquitted. He said this without sadness, just as one finds an inevitable fact. But thanks for listening to me, Father. He needed to share this weight with someone, and then it came out. He simply left, leaving me alone in the confessional with the echo of 4 homicide confessions and the certainty that he could never tell anyone what he had heard. I was sitting there for hours, listening to the silence of the empty church. The candles continued to flutter, indifferent to the horror that had just been revealed. The smell of melted wax and old wood remained the same, as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. I had changed. That night, when I locked the confessional door, took me a question that still chases me. Helena was really free? Or had you just exchanged an arrest of violence for an obsessive protection arrest? And if she knew that 4 people died to secure their freedom, would you still feel free? Some confessions are too heavy even for God to carry, and some questions have no answer, just silence, eternal silence.